I want to ask you a little bit more about, you talked about those cooling centers, and the deputy city manager has said the next step after the cooling centers is to create climate resilience hubs. Can you talk a bit more about what those hubs would look like, where they would be housed, and what kind of services they can provide?
Heat is one of the worst hazards when it comes to climate change. And I've always said it for many years that climate change is not just an environmental issue, it is a public health issue. And so we have to realize that even though City of Tucson and other cities throughout the country are leading on climate adaptation and climate action, that if the world doesn't act immediately, we will continue to see heat waves and um, events throughout the world that will affect not just infrastructure, but lives. And so
Mm.
um, I am calling on the federal government, on OSHA to institutionalize equitable rules for outside
Mm.
workers, because as we all know, the front line of climate change are the most vulnerable amongst us. So that's
Mm.
children, seniors, low income communities of color, outside workers, and the unsheltered. And
Mm.
so we've got to be able to mitigate, but also prepare for resiliency and the possibility of this being the new normal. So, resilience hubs are basically cooling centers, but that can sustain themselves with solar energy and batteries.
Mm.
And we've got to be able to plan for heat events where we can invite the most vulnerable that do not have access to air conditioning, that need to be monitored, to be able to have centers throughout the city of Tucson that can sustain themselves in case of an electric catastrophe. So that is my new focus in terms of where we go as a city in terms of climate mitigation and climate adaptation. And in the meantime, we have to create cooling corridors, and we use a lot of science behind this, a lot of data behind the decisions that we're making as a city. The most vulnerable communities, um, and it's no surprise, live in the lowest income areas of our city. This is where we have the highest heat island effects in our city. And so we've got to be able to create cooling corridors in the areas of our city where we see the most heat island effect. And we're starting to do that. We have a map that we follow based on heat island, and the heat
Mm.
island map coincides with our low income map. And so
Yeah.
we're focusing on equity on top of the science that we need to do, and we're partnering with nonprofit organizations like Trees for Tucson and for-profit companies that are helping fund the purchasing of trees as well. So lots of layering in our methods.